This video is brought to you by Sailrite. Visit Sailrite.com for all your project supplies, tools, and instructions. A Bimini top for a powerboat or a pontoon boat or even a sailboat requires a frame to support it. In this video, we're going to show you how to make your own Bimini frame using supplies from Sailrite. Sailrite has recently redone an old pontoon boat and made it look brand new. One of the steps we did was build a new Bimini. In this video, we're going to show you how to build the frame. Before you can build your Bimini frame, you need to take some measurements to determine which Bimini frame is best for you. This is the objective of this video, to build a 3-bow Bimini frame. We'll be building the Bimini frame on this pontoon boat, though the steps for any boat are done in the exact same way. Sailrite carries many frame sizes in stainless steel and aluminum. To determine what size will work for you, we need to take a few measurements. To start with, you need to know the width from the mounting position on port and starboard.
93.5 inches.
Next, the amount of spread, fore and aft. Between each set of bows, you will only be able to carry a max 42 inches of fabric. Here's an illustration for our 3-bow frame kit. A good starting position for the setting of the primary bow is at a 45-degree angle to the waterline. Now, if the angle is changed, say to about 68 degrees, you will gain height, but cut down on the amount of spread fore and aft. The same is true with a 4-bow frame as seen here. This is shown with the typical setup at 45 degrees to the waterline. So when picking a kit, you'll notice that kits have a nominal height at maximum spread. As height increases above nominal height, the maximum spread decreases, and vice versa. Utilizing those 3 measurements, you should be able to pick out a kit that's right for your application. To pick your frame or kit, visit Sailrite.com and type a keyword search, Bimini Frame. You'll find multiple options to pick from. To begin installation, you will need to determine where the flat mounts or deck hinges will be installed. To do this, we like to use drafting paper and draw to scale a sketch of where our Bimini will be located to cover our desired location on the boat. Or instead of drawing it out, you could get the bows with a helper and take them to the boat and hold them at the appropriate angle and the appropriate spread fore and aft to determine where the flat mounts go. We did it both ways, and we determined that we need a flat mount here 43 inches from the stern rail. We're drilling holes in our aluminum rail here with a drill bit because we will be using stainless steel rivets to mount our flat mounts. Here Brian has put a stainless steel rivet in that one hole and he starts to pre-drill the second hole. Then he moves the base and drills all the way through the top surface only. Now he can install both rivets. In lieu of rivets, you could just use screws. We're using a stainless steel rivet, which is rather difficult to set. We're also using a heavy-duty riveting tool. But it will take 2 hands to set this rivet in place, since it's stainless steel. If hardware like this is mounted on a fiberglass surface, it must be bedded appropriately to prevent leakage. We'll be showing that in the next chapter. Typically, installing hardware like this on fiberglass is done with stainless steel screws, and those stainless steel screws for hardware come in the Bimini kits. We also opted to install flat mounts at the stern rail, so we can install 2 rigid supports that will help to support the Bimini when the straps along the front are released. Then the Bimini bows can be pushed back, and those 2 rigid supports will support the whole Bimini as we install the Bimini boot. Here you can see the Bimini resting on the rigid supports with the Bimini boot cover on. And if we freeze the frame here, you can see strap eyes, flat mounts, and rigid supports. A 3rd rigid support provides stability horizontally across the boat. Hardware is often mounted to fiberglass decks. We'll show you in this chapter how to properly bed it. Here we're going to demonstrate installing the universal deck hinge. This will be a future location for a dodger on this sailboat. Once you've determined the location of the fitting, use an awl or a punch and make a recess so your drill bit will not wander when you start to drill through the fiberglass. To install the universal deck hinge, we'll use stainless steel Phillips oval head tapping screws, number 10 size. For these screws, we recommend a 5/32 inch bit. Since we're using self-tapping screws, we only want to go the depth of the screw mounted in the hardware. So here we'll measure its depth and then place tape on the drill bit so we go almost exactly the same depth as the screw will go in the fiberglass. That way we won't go through the other side of the fiberglass. Because the awl made a little recess, we can drill this without the bit moving when we drill through the fiberglass. The depth of the hole must accommodate the entire length of the screw that will protrude from the bottom of the hardware. We recommend that you countersink the hole. Here we're using a countersink bit to do so. If you don't do this, you may have problems down the road with stress cracks coming from the screw's area. Another advantage of the countersunk hole is that our butyl tape that we'll be using for a bedding compound will be compressed into that cavity, and it'll make a beautiful watertight bedding compound for our fixture. We've removed a small section of butyl tape from the roll and will now take it and form it or press it onto the post of the screw. It will compress nicely when the fitting comes up against the deck. Any hardware that needs to be mounted to the fiberglass deck should be bedded in such a way, including the strap eyes or other hardware. If you are through bolting, follow the same procedure. Now, as we screw this fastener or universal deck hinge onto our fiberglass, you'll notice that the butyl tape squeezes out from underneath our fastener. That means it's also filling up that cavity that we created over the hole, thus making this a very watertight application. Butyl tape is also very easy to clean up. Here we'll take some excess butyl tape and wad it up, and then just simply use it to dab up the squeezed out portion of the butyl tape around our fastener. Bimini frame kits come with the universal deck hinges. Our Bimini will be mounted to the rail. If you want to change what comes in the kit, be sure to give us a call. We're glad to change any components that come with any of the Bimini frames or Bimini kits. Our flat mount or universal deck hinge is now mounted. Also, our strap eyes are. We did not show doing the strap eyes.
Okay. Now, yesterday when we had more assistance, what we did was we actually put up the frame along with our, we've pre-drawn where we want everything to lay out. So we've actually already kind of put it up and judged where we want to put it. But to show how you would normally do that, we want to look here and realize that we're going to lose some height here with the mounting hardware. The end of your tubing will actually end up right about there. So basically, if you come down, you want to add about an inch if you're using the pivot screw, or I'm sorry, subtract about an inch if you're using the pivot screw as your marking point. Yesterday we've determined that we want the frame to fall about like that, and because we're going to, that gives us the height we want, also covers the entire playpen, and then or the entire aft section of the playpen, and that gets us right where we want. So we want to position that there. And then what we'll do is we'll mark that and determine how much we need to cut off.
The 3-bow Bimini kit that we've chosen is a 7/8 inch diameter stainless steel tubing. The stainless steel tubing is a little bit difficult to cut. We recommend using a bandsaw or a hacksaw with a 24 teeth per inch blade installed. Because we want to show the time that it takes to cut the stainless steel tubing, we're going to show all of this as Brian cuts the tubing to size. It takes less than a minute to cut the tubing.
Okay, now what we're going to be doing is we're going to cut our secondary bow.
Here's an illustration to remind you what the secondary bow is. It's the forward bow.
We've already cut our primary bow, which the primary bow is the one I'm laying on top of my secondary bows. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to make a quick mark of the length of the primary bow. Now, the secondary bow we want to start with, we want it to be 3 inches shorter. And we're going to go ahead and mark both bows. I've made sure that they're even. And so that's where we're going to cut our secondary bow. And the reason we cut it there is because we have the fittings. We're going to have a fitting, jaw slide, and then the eye end that goes onto here. And so that will allow the secondary bow to lay on the primary bow.
Here's a look ahead.
Now that right there will give us our max spread.
The secondary bow hockey stick section ends will be cut. We will not show that. The crown is the top piece of our bow that goes horizontally, and it actually has a curve in it, as you can see here. That's what we'll be cutting to size next.
Okay, to determine our width, the first thing we need to do is measure the desired frame width. So I'll do that here on the boat. 93.5 inches. Okay, so our desired width is 93.5 inches, so I'm just going to jot that down. And so what we want to do is we're going to subtract 93.5 from 106. Okay, so we're going to have 12.5 will be our number, and so then we want to divide that by 2. So we want to cut 6 1/4 inches off the end of each crown.
Why is it important to cut it off of each end rather than one end? Because each of the horizontal crowns have a curve in them. That's why we call them crowns. If you cut it off of one end, the crown would not be in the center. This time, to cut the tubing, we have a pad up against the pontoon boat so the tubing will not scratch. We didn't show that the first time. This is a wise idea. Use a towel or a pad to keep from scratching the tubing. You may need a second helper here to help hold the tubing as you cut it. One person is really not quite enough to keep the tubing from moving around as it's being cut. We have a second person not shown in the video holding the other end of the tubing. Our Bimini is a 3-bow, so we have to do this to 3 crowns on all ends. We will not show cutting the other ends off. Our primary and secondary bows are cut to size, and now the horizontal crowns are cut to length. Up next, we will join the hockey stick sections to the crown. A spline has been inserted into the end of each hockey stick section, and that spline can be pushed into the crown. With both hockey stick ends in place on the crown, roll the crown around so that it is flat on the floor, as seen here. Be sure the cut ends are pushed up against each other so they are flush. Depending on how straight you cut, they may not match up perfectly, but this is totally acceptable. Brian will now explain how to lock them in place.
Okay, before we start, since we've got our frame nice and straight, I want to take and just scribe a quick line across each one. So that way we ensure if we do twist it, we can get it straightened back out before we drill.
Drilling stainless steel is not much fun, so we're going to use the Drill Steady tubing tool available from Sailrite here to ensure that our hole is drilled nicely and starts beautifully in the stainless steel tubing. This tool takes an 1/8 inch drill bit.
Okay, make sure we're straight here.
To ensure that we're straight, we'll take some scrap tubing and place it under one of the legs of the hockey stick ends. Now we'll use an 1/8 inch drill bit and drill through the stainless steel tubing and into the spline. We're about 2 inches from the joint of the spline. The rivet that was installed by Sailrite is underneath the bow, but for the sake of ease, we've decided to drill here so that the tubing can lay flat on the floor. Doing it this way makes it easy to drill through the tubing as it lays flat on the floor. If you'd like to install the rivet on the underside, as Sailrite did, you can definitely do that, but it does take a little bit more effort. Once the 1/8 inch hole is installed, we can now switch drill bits and widen the hole. The stainless steel rivet from Sailrite requires a number 11 size drill bit.
Well, I'd rather the chuck slip than the bit break.
Once this hole is made, we can use the stainless steel rivets that come with the kit. These rivets come with the kit, and install it in the same manner that we did when we installed the flat mounts that you saw earlier. At each splice on each one of our bows, we need to repeat this procedure. So here we're repeating the steps yet again, at this splice or spline. All of our bows will need to be assembled in this manner. The primary, secondary, and a little bit later on we'll do the intermediate bow in the same way. While Brian continues to work on the secondary bow, here's what that primary bow looks like with the crown, which is that horizontal piece. A little hint here, in preparation for patterning, we'll place a mark on the tubing. So Brian's taking a permanent marker and wrapping our strapping tape around it so that it can fit snugly inside of one of our scrap tubing pieces. He'll use this to mark a center line on the bow as it's laying on the floor.
Okay, the reason that we taped up our pen there is so that way we'll be able to mark a center line. Basically what I've done is I took one of our scrap pieces that we cut off and I wrapped tape around it to center the pen, and then what I can do is I can take it and just lay it on the floor and I'll be able to scribe a line, and what that'll be is as we pattern, that will be our baseline.
We'll also want to measure and find the center location of our crown and place a mark there. Measure from spline joint to find the center. We'll be using that later on in patterning. Why not do it now while it's on the floor? We will not show that here.
Okay, first we want to go ahead and slide our jaw slides in place. Now this is our primary or our aft bow. So the topmost jaw slide will be for the aft strut. So we'll slide it on with a screw facing out. So slide it up. And then the next two on this side will be for the forward bows. And so I want them facing up with a screw out. And if you're doing this on the water, maybe not a bad idea, just go ahead and take all the set screws out, put them someplace safe so you don't drop them. Okay, so we've got two facing one way, the other facing the other way. We'll do the same thing on the other side. Okay, now we're ready to set our aft bow in the cup.
The aft bow is our primary bow and the cup is the eye end. Brian is doing this all on his own, no helper. That is a pain in the butt. It's best to have a helper to do this job.
Would have been easier to have that set screw facing up.
Lock both ends of the primary bow into the eye end via the set screw. Now strapping tape can be applied at the center of the crown of the primary bow, and it will be used to temporarily support our primary bow. We will attach it to a solid structure somewhere towards the front of the boat. This is just a temporary way to hold up that primary bow.
What we're doing here is we really just want to get our general position, which we recall that we were about to the aft portion of the playpen. I'm going to drop it a little bit more.
Brian's doing this in preparation for installing the aft rigid support struts. Bimini kits do not come with rigid support struts. They are sold separately. The Bimini skin kits come with 4 adjustable webbing straps. Those may be substituted for rigid support struts, but you'll need to order those separately.
Okay, and really all we're doing here is we want to be able to determine the height of our struts.
Bimini skin kits come with 4 adjustable webbing straps. However, here we're going to be installing rigid support struts, which are sold separately. If you plan on using the 4 adjustable webbing straps in lieu of rigid support struts, simply use the filament strapping tape to secure your frame in place, following basically the same principles here, except for here we're using a rigid support strut. We'll be showing using the filament strapping tape in the Adjusting Primary and Secondary Bows chapter coming up soon.
Okay, and we'll be able to move this around once we're set. What we want to do right now is just, we want to get it so it's not quite vertical, but close. And now we can take a measurement. And so we're right at our 31 inches.
We cut one of the rigid support struts to 31 inches. Rigid support struts are provided by Sailrite at 36 inches. So we cut off 5 inches. Now we will attach that tubing to the 2 eye ends and tighten down the set screws. The rigid support strut kits come with 2 support struts. We'll attach one to the starboard and one to the port side. If you've opted not to order the rigid support struts, just use your filament strapping tape and support the frame using that.
So now we basically judged everything off of one side. Now before we permanently tighten this, I mean, we've got it semi-tight. Before we get all crazy, what we want to do is we want to measure this side, and we are 38.5 inches, and we want to make this side match. And then we'll double check.
In another video, we will show installing yet another rigid support, which will help to support the Bimini from moving side to side.
Yeah, we're calling that close enough.
Now the rigid supports will support our primary bow. Here's a look ahead at that additional rigid support, which will help support our Bimini from moving side to side too much. Only one rigid support is needed here. We didn't show assembling the secondary bow, but it has been assembled just as we did with the primary bow. Now we'll take a jaw slide and release the set screw and install an eye end in preparation for inserting our secondary bow. The jaw slide above this will be used for our intermediate bow in a later step. Inserting a bow really should be done with a helper. Brian is doing it all on his own, inserting the ends of the bow into the eye ends. Once inserted, the set screw should be tightened down on the bow. Then adjustments can be made to align the bows so they are directly on top of each other. The jaw slide here will be loosened and raised up so the bow is directly on top of our primary bow. Like that. So a few inches up here, it makes it almost perfect. That's literally all we need to do to install this secondary bow onto the primary bow, and make sure they're almost on top of each other as seen here. Next up, we need to do some adjusting of the primary and secondary bows. To accomplish this task, we will use our strapping tape, and we've secured it in the center of our primary bow. We'll lift the secondary bow and temporarily tape it in place. Then we'll take some measurements. First off, we'll take a measurement from the floor all the way up to the primary bow, and then we'll measure the secondary bow from the floor up as well. We want them to be fairly level. They don't have to be perfect, but we don't want one to be much lower than the other.
76.
Adjustments can be made with the strapping tape, and if that doesn't do it, you can use the rigid support
79.
struts and move the jaw slides up and down.
86 inches. Didn't we say our max was 84? Okay, let me go a little higher.
The distance between two bows can only support up to a max of 42 inches of fabric. So Brian is trying to measure to ensure that it is 84 inches because we will have a 3 bow. A intermediate bow has not yet been installed.
Yep, 84.
Now that we have 84 inches between bows, we can secure the strapping tape a little bit better.
We're going to come just a little bit lower because if we were straight up and down, we'd be up into the sleeve. So we're going to come a bit lower. And this side here, I'm really just going to kind of eyeball it and put it where I'm happy with it, which is there.
The strapping tape location will be where a strap eye is used for a webbing strap to pull it down to the rail to keep the front edge of the Bimini taut.
And I'll come down with my strap, and I'm going to go to the exact same point where my strap will go. Now for consistency, I'm going to go ahead and measure and carry that to the other side.
If you did not opt to purchase the rigid support struts sold separately at the aft, you would use the filament strapping tape and do the same there as you do here. This strapping tape will hold the secondary bow firm as we work with the intermediate bow assembly. It will also be used to hold it firm as we pattern.
And this one's a little loose.
To ensure that the bow is straight, we need to make sure that the strapping tape is the same on both sides.
Okay, now that we've got everything into position, what we do want to do is we want to go ahead and we're going to add some additional strapping tape. Now we want to be careful as we do this. We don't want to change our height at all. We're not trying to add tension. We're just adding additional strength to what we have. Because in our next step, we are going to add quite a bit of tension.
We'll do this to both sides. In preparation for the assembly of the intermediate bow, strapping tape will be run from the secondary bow to the primary bow. Secure it so that it is straight across but not super taut. This strapping tape will be used to find the intermediate bow middle position.
Okay, now what I'm doing is to determine our center bow. I put a piece of strapping tape and you'll see that there's not really any tension on it because I don't want to twist my frame since I'm only working on one side. But this will help me determine where my center bow needs to be. Now, what I'll want to do here, I want to make a mark at the approximate center of this particular strapping tape.
Our 3-bow Bimini is set for the maximum spread of 84 inches, so Brian is finding the center location, which is 42 inches, and then he marks the strapping tape with a permanent marker.
So on this particular frame, we want our center bow to be center. So the key here is we want to find out with this bow what the pivot point is. We want to be approximately the same angle as our forward bow, but more importantly, I'm going to lay it up actually on top here. More importantly, when we lay it back, we need to make sure that it will lay on the bow. Now you can see there, I would be too short. So we'll bring that up. We'll pretend that this is our pivot point here. We'll set that right on top of there. Pretend this is our pivot point. And we're still pretty far off here. So shorten our bow, shorten our placement. There we're center, we're roughly the same angle. We fold back, we're just the slightest bit low. So right here is going to be our approximate pivot point.
Brian will mark that position with a Sharpie marker, but he's also going to confirm it by moving the jaw slide and using an eye end.
Now I've got marks on both the frame and the bow, so I can hold it and see how I feel about it.
Remember that the jaw slide and eye end will add some length to that bow. That's why it's a good idea to do what he's doing next.
So now that we have our approximate position, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take and put our jaw slide and our eye end in that rough place.
He positions it loosely over the mark he made.
And I don't want to get too tight with my jaw slide here because I could mar up the fitting where I don't want it to be. And I've got a short piece of tubing that I actually cut from our forward bow. And I'm going to take and slide it into the eye end and tighten down that set screw. Now I'm going to take a couple pieces of strapping tape and just go around a couple times. And then just let that hang. Do the same thing once more. Now I can take our tube and with the position we're in, let's lay it there and see how we like that. Okay, now we can pivot. And remember, we want to come up a little bit. That's a little bit too high, so we're going to try bringing this down just ever so slightly. Get it right about there. It's also one of those things, it's a lot easier if you have a second set of hands. Okay, I like that. And let's see where we're at here. And I like that.
As you can see, the jaw slide and the eye end changed our markings.
So now I'm going to go ahead and mark where I want to cut my bow.
So instead of using that first mark, he's going to mark it again so that it is buried inside the eye end.
Fold forward one more time. Not bad with the angle, so you know the middle bow is not it's not scientific, so just put it where you're happy with it, and that's at this stage I'm happy with it. You can always adjust it slightly by moving the jaw slide up and down if needed, but to get that cut, we'll go ahead and start right there.
We're going to use a permanent marker and mark the middle of the intermediate bow for patterning later on, as we did with the other bows. And then we will install it just like we did with the primary and the secondary. The intermediate bow should go above the tape in the middle. A second helper would be helpful for this as well. Also take note that it would probably have been better for the eye end set screw to be facing up rather than down as it is here. It would have made it easier to tighten the set screw, and the set screw would not be up against the primary bow when the Bimini is folded back. That's all there is to installing a Bimini frame. Up next will be patterning for the Bimini. That will be covered in a separate video. But before we go, we want to show you the materials list and the tools that you will need to make this Bimini frame for yourself. You can order a Bimini Frame Kit from Sailrite in stainless steel or aluminum. If you'd like to make changes or substitutions to the Bimini frame hardware, be sure to give us a call. We'll be glad to make those modifications, then email you a detailed quote. The next step in completing your 3-bow Bimini top is to watch the How to Make a 3-bow Bimini Top. You can click the link here, and also here are some other related videos to Biminis. Be sure to subscribe to the Sailrite YouTube channel, or visit us at Sailrite.com for more videos like this. It's your loyal patronage to Sailrite that makes these free videos available. I'm Eric Grant, and from all of us here at Sailrite, thanks for watching.